Hello and welcome back. Next, I'm delighted to introduce a headliner panel discussion on the subject of keeping control of artificial intelligence. Who should be in charge? Here to discuss this very topical issue, we have an extremely illustrious panel for you, consisting of Hubert Etienne, philosopher of Facebook AI research, lecturer in AI ethics at Sciences Po and the European Business School, Ike van Emmeren, who's the lead public tech at he's the lead in public technology and the chief technology officer of the City of Amsterdam. We are also joined by John Havens, the executive director of the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems, Dima Al-Yahya, who's the digital economy and innovation advisor and founder of Women Spark. Keeping them all in order, your moderator, who I'm delighted to hand over to, is Leila El Azri, who's the research team lead of Borealis AI. Leila, welcome to you and your beautiful panel.
Hi, thank you, Anushka.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks a lot to Inspired AI for hosting the panel. Thanks to all the participants in this call, and thanks to the panelists for agreeing to be part of this conversation. My name is Leila El Azri. I myself am an AI researcher. I currently am a research team lead at Borealis AI, which is the research lab of the Royal Bank of Canada. And I'm very excited to be talking about this very important topic today with such a great set of panelists. Before we start, I'll ask everybody to just give a quick introduction and perhaps say a bit about what they think about this topic. So let's start with you, Dima.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from where you are in the world. I am Dima Al-Yahya, and I am a digital economy and innovation advisor for several government entities in Saudi Arabia, as well as the founder of Women Spark. Women Spark is a foundation that we have started 7 years ago, which the objective is to enable women in technology and stimulate and motivate digital innovation within the female IT professional ecosystem in Saudi Arabia. We're very fortunate to organically have 62% of our IT graduates of universities. IT colleges are women, and therefore enabling them with the right opportunities. They are creating jobs and as well as impacting the digital economy.
Thank you. Ike, do you want to go next?
Yes, well, impressed, Dima, with what you're working on. Ike van Emmeren, I work for the City of Amsterdam, the lead public tech. Within the topic we're discussing today, I'm working on the city agendas on artificial intelligence, and that goes from what kind of companies do we want to establish themselves in Amsterdam, what do we procure ourselves, what kind of tools do we buy as a city. But also, and I think that's important for today, what's happening in our city. And there's a lot of discussion about ethical and AI and what's going on. We can do a lot of within our city. What do we use, and is that ethical and all right? But what's happening in public space, and how do we make sure that all things around AI in public space are happening in the correct way? And that's an important topic we're working on.
Thank you. Hubert?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Hubert. I'm a philosopher, specialized on the philosophy of digital technologies mainly, and more specifically at the intersection between AI and social networks. I'm mainly conducting my research at Facebook AI in Paris, as well as École Normale Supérieure in Paris also. And I'm also teaching AI ethics as a lecturer at Sciences Po in Paris and as ESCP in Berlin.
Thank you. And John?
Hello, good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Really great to be here. And I wear a couple hats with IEEE, the world's largest professional engineering organization. I'm executive director of their largest AI ethics program. And then we've also started a program with MIT not too long ago called the Council on Extended Intelligence. Here, though, I'm speaking as John. You know, my thoughts don't necessarily reflect those organizations, but really glad to be here.
Thanks a lot for being part of this panel. So AI is a topic that we hear more and more of. It's a field that's ever evolving, ever innovating. We hear a lot about the promises of AI in domains such as healthcare, education, transportation. But we also start to hear more and more about certain dangers and about the need to do AI the right way. We hear about certain cities who have banned technologies such as facial recognition for it not being really ready to be used in public and it containing certain risks. We have issues around accountability with technologies such as autonomous driving, in healthcare as well that could happen. So there is definitely a growing concern around AI and whether or not we are building technology that is actually going to be safe and going to benefit everybody, or that could have potential important dangers. So my first question for you is, what exactly about AI should be controlled? What are some problems that you have observed and that you're actively working on? And perhaps we can start with you, Hubert.
Happy to trigger the discussion. So yeah, as you said, I think I do agree there's a lot of questions come with AI. What I tend to focus more is not necessarily the issues that most people talk about, like autonomous lethal weapons or biases and fairness, not because they're not important, don't get me wrong, but more because I think that's a topic that are already receiving a lot of light. There's a whole conference called Fairness and Transparency. There's a whole team at Facebook focusing on biases. So there's already a lot of people working on that. What I tend to worry more is about the issues which fail at catching the light they kind of deserve, either because they seem a bit too abstract or theoretical, or because there's no interest to deliberately avoid them. And in this direction, I think perhaps the first point I'd like to make is that when we talk about AI ethics and governance, the main pitfall, to my opinion, is the one regarding public attention. So are we prioritizing the right topics on the right moment? I think that's a very important question. And just to give you a quick example, when you teach AI ethics, it's very tempted to talk about fancy topics like killer robots or general AI or existential risks. I think we all know that. It's much more tempted than talking about more boring topics like algorithmic governmentality and the type of knowledge that our algorithms are producing with the new type of statistics that is being used here, and the potential dangers they may have in terms of in the absence of correct feedback loops, for instance. So one is cool, the other one is boring, it's technical, it's complex, but I think it's much more important to focus on the second one. So all these issues are important, but just well prioritizing these issues, I think, is absolutely crucial here.
That's a really good point. Anybody wants to add to this? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm really curious about when it comes to control. How do you see this in the perspective of like a normal human being waking up, and what you just said and explained? What does it mean for just the average person waking up tomorrow? When it comes to how does AI control your daily life?
How AI controls daily life? So are you talking about the kind of knowledge, or?
Well, when it comes to feedback loops, I think what I'm concerned about, and that's why I think it's interesting to discuss this today. What you said, I mean, we're focusing a lot on are the data sets correct, or are the metrics all right, or is there bias, and how do we do not discriminate? And you mentioned that there's a lot of attention already for those topics, and I'm interested in how do you see that we're actually addressing those topics when it comes to daily life. And you mentioned you worked at Facebook AI. We're having elections in the Netherlands. How do I know that algorithms don't affect my opinion when we discuss our politics? Or how do I know that when I cross the street that algorithms don't interfere with how I walk or where do I go? And we know that we're influencing those systems, at least in Amsterdam. I'm really proud of what kind of technology we use. So we do influence Waze and Google Maps, etc., to make sure that, well, your navigation tools are up to date and they actually use the information we have when it comes to when we fix a street, you know it in Google Maps. And that's a nice service we offer, I think. But it's also a thing we have to discuss on, okay, how much can we influence the daily life? And I'm curious about how do we transfer the bridge from the intellectual debate about ethics and AI to complex standards, and it's really, really complex. So that's where I leave it to you as a philosopher. But how do we make it practical to, how can I make sure that AI doesn't influence my life in a bad way as a normal citizen?
So yes, just perhaps two elements of reply here. The first one, I think it's going to influence us anyway. Everything influences us. The design, any kind of design influences us. The question perhaps is, to what extent does it influence us? Is it actually competing with our autonomy? Is it paternalistic by design in somewhat? And if so, in which direction does it lead? There's some good influences. I'm sure we have a lot of examples of good influences. But then, yeah, the question is, am I in control of that? And to which direction does it forward me? The second point, in terms of very practical examples, so when I was referring to the issue of feedback loop, there's actually one book that I think is absolutely great, which is the one of Cathy O'Neill on Weapons of Mass Destruction, when she elaborates on the fact that the absence of feedback loop, as well as the absence of transparency for users, lead to specific technologies having very important and devastative consequences on people's life, especially so when you the fact that some people actually collect some data which are very poor quality data because they're unregulated, use it to train a specific algorithm that will predict the kind of consumers you will be, the kind of income you may have, in order to change the way you will be processed by specific administrations or services. And so when you call the hotline, you may be very well prioritized and have somebody online in 20 seconds, a high profile, or you can wait for 2 hours and never have somebody online. So that's the kind of feedback loops I was referring to and the kind of protection we may need for.
John, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, thank you. And it's not necessarily just directed to what was said, but kind of the general aspect of the daily life question, which I think is a really good one. I think one thing there's a need to demystify, AI oftentimes is very confusing, and Hubert, hopefully I'm saying that right. You say your name beautifully, by the way. What does that even mean? Are we talking machine learning, AGI, inverse reinforcement learning? And the main thing to remember is that it's always about data, right? Meaning the systems that access data, they don't function without data. It's like a car without gasoline, right? So I think one thing to think transversely is actually about data sovereignty, right? And while we are currently tracked, right, by cities and businesses, and this is very positive, right? Meaning for business, it lets people know my preferences. For cities, it keeps me protected. There's a universal, absolute seminal need, and we're saying this in the work that we do at IEEE. We have multiple standards working groups that are open for anyone to join talking about this, to recognize that the outside-in tracking, which is very useful and helpful, really has kind of existed for almost 10 years, whether we call it AI or anything else. The essential tools that are needed are also what's the inside out, which the very general term is data sovereignty. Now, this is very complex. It is not a silver bullet, but I want to be clear that it's not a either or, it's a yes and, right? I used to work in PR as an EVP at a top 10 PR firm. Gillette was a client, right? So guys and razors. Tracking what a guy says about how he shaves is one way to analyze his sentiment and his behavior. hearing what he actually says and having a direct peer-to-peer relationship with him does not exist yet universally through things like blockchain or data sovereignty. So it's not a silver bullet, but there are countries like Estonia that are doing amazing work in this, e-Estonia. There's whole regions like India that have used Aadhaar, and then we have to talk about centralized and decentralized. But the logic is, I think there's a myth or a grand understanding about the difference between privacy, which involves regulation like GDPR, and things that have to happen. These are must-haves. But there's also the absolute seminal need, especially as we go into augmented and virtual reality, to give people agency about how they share their data, or else for brands and governments, our data won't be useful anymore because we won't even know who we are. The second thing, just two other quick points. Design is critical to talk about. Hubert made some great points. It's very easy to get into this mysticism about robots or this and all that. Oh, okay, let's take a break. Responsible AI is about methodologies. I think a lot of the reasons we avoid the conversations is it's just hard work. It's not this mystical, like, what's ethical, what's moral? It's telling your entire organization and cross-pollinating and saying, look, I'm sorry, the CIO is going to have to talk to the CMO, data scientists who aren't used to knowing about marketing speak, which is fair. You all kind of have to listen to each other at the outset, the beginning of design. That's what's critical too. In PR, I learned this very, very specifically. Waiting till a crisis happens means bolt-on ethics, which means you've already lost trust. Gaining back trust once it's lost is very different than taking more time up front to really design well in a participatory way. And the final thing, and I wanted to give Ake a shout out to the Netherlands, is we have to be asking ourselves, what are the metrics for success for any AI we create? If the metrics, because no one wants to harm anybody, right? No one's going to be like, I want opaque AI, right? Like transparency. No, we hate it. Opacity. Like no one's going to say that, right? Because that's not what we're trying to do. But the ultimate question is, are we building things largely with a societal success of, in my old business world, it was called a single bottom line, which is exponential growth and exponential profits. There's nothing wrong with profits or growth. It's that word exponential. Humans aren't built to be infinite, neither is nature. And if we continue societally, not just business, but policy and everyone, to say we got to build things as fast as we can and get it out there, that is an ideology that underlies everything we build. And we have to, and I bring up the Netherlands, they, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, they've been working with Kate Raworth, who wrote this fantastic book called Donut Economics, which is not about saying let's not focus on profit, but saying we must have what's called a triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, to rethink what societal value means for all of us, but also for these beautiful and amazing machines.
Thank you. I think you raised a really good point. It makes me think about the environmental impact of building the machine learning models that we're building. I work with language. And the trend is to build those really big machine learning models that we call neural networks. And they're getting bigger and bigger because we have more and more compute power. We have bigger and bigger infrastructure. We have the means to do that. And there have been some studies that have showed that building these models consume an enormous amount of energy. And they actually cost millions of dollars for the companies building them. So there's definitely an environmental impact of just doing the research in AI that we don't necessarily talk about very often. So yeah, I thought that was a really great point. Dima, I'd like to ask you the same question and get to know about your reflection on what do you think should be controlled about AI?
It's connecting to your point just now that in implementing AI, what are the environmental implications? You know, what I'm seeing is that AI is becoming a trend more than looking at it as a enabling tool. And I think the most important thing is looking at using AI, and why should we invest in those implementations? At the end of the day, we're looking at the fourth industrial revolution. Digital transformation is all about disrupting business models, and these technologies are becoming enablers. So for me, I think what should be looked at or is the fundamentals of AI, which is the data itself. Are we having the right data strategies? Are we securing the data? What is the policy when it comes to data sharing? When it comes to the antitrust policies and regulations for using data? I think that AI is that umbrella and that utilizes that data, machine learning, and so on. So I think what is the concern that I have is how are we collecting, storing, and using the data, not only from technology perspective, but also from regulations and policies. Still now, we do not have a unified global policy on data sharing. The G20 is right around the corner in 2 weeks, and the communique that has been communicated from the Digital Economy Task Force has identified that it is very important for us to find certain agreements or consents as countries to how are we looking at data sharing and even data trade, which will affect digital economy later on. So this is actually my worry, is the fundamental, is the data actually.
Maybe I can add something to that, because I cannot more underline what you just said, Dima, because we're now having this debate in Amsterdam. For your reference, in the Netherlands, we have officers who work on data quality. An example, we've got a department within the city of Amsterdam who are just checking if data is correct. Not all kind of data sets, but example, do you live where you live? Are the metrics of the park still in the same place? Not every country has it, but I think it really is really helpful that we have this data quality infrastructure in the Netherlands. And it's traditionally been built around sort of basic numbers like where do you live, etc. We're using more and more data, of course. So we're working on a data strategy. And one of our discussions is what you just addressed, like how do you do that for all kind of data sets? One of the things and it's not official policy yet because we're searching on how to operationalize this, is how do we work on government to business to government data and vice versa? An example, should all the data about a city or about public space be available to policy or IDs within public space? Talking about concepts like data commons, every information should be available for. And I think that's really important because maybe not everything is about transparency and opacity, as you said, John, but I do think that we have to be transparent about on what kind of information our society has been built. And a colleague did one experiment, and it was really, really interesting and really opened eyes of a lot of people. Like, if you use the data to show what's happening in the neighborhood, or if you ask people, can you describe who are the key players, you do get a different result. I really like the idea of data deserts. It's by one of the Jorrit de Jonge, professor from Harvard. He introduced the concept of data deserts. Like, do remind yourself occasionally that you only have historically built on certain data sets, and maybe our new political debate will be that we have to invest millions in creating equal or new data sets to make sure that if that's so important to build models, etc., in our society, we have to address topics like that. So we don't have a data strategy yet, like you mentioned, Dima. We have it for an internal organization, and a lot of people have, but a data strategy on societal questions like this, if you have an example, I'm really happy to read it, because this is the debate we're in at the moment.
We still also don't have a data strategy. We're working on it. We authority for data and AI, specifically to look at the overall government and private sector standards and policy and regulation. But I think that silo will not help. We have to unify that globally, because at the end of the day, it's just a matter of time and we're going to start trading data. And then we would need that unified, cohesive alignment, definitely.
Thanks. I think we touched upon a lot of really important subjects. One question that I had was, what are some specificities of AI compared to non-autonomous systems? And I think we touched upon the data strategy, the data governance, the relative opaqueness of these systems compared to algorithms that are more transparent and easy to understand. Are there other fundamental aspects of AI that you think should be we should shed a light on?
Yeah, I thought it's the floor for the philosophers, but maybe at least from the city perspective, what's different is that it's a very simple thing. At least in the Netherlands, in the end, you need to have the right to oppose to something. So if we make a decision as a city, you always have the right to disagree and to make a complaint or something. But when you have a more flexible model, it's really complex to respond to this decision, or if the decision can be changed during the process because there's new information and the model recreated its advice. Examples like, how do we navigate traffic? If we continuously improve that model, if I want to make a complaint about the model because I do have too many traffic in my street, how does it work? So I think that's a very specific thing when it comes to AI, referring to your question, where we have to do it. So how do you be able to make a complaint or improve, or contestable infrastructures, I think is the name. How do you contest to a specific algorithm? And that's one of the aspects we need to sort out, regulate, look into.
Absolutely.
I'd like to add quickly something, and it also comes back to the point you were making right before on the data sharing, the public data sharing available for which actor and under which circumstances. And I think actually the question of not only data sharing, but also open research is very important here, because there's many technology with many practices among researchers, but one which is particularly characteristic of AI, the AI community to me, is the culture of open source. So it's pretty easy for anyone to find a research paper on archive, to find any code on GitHub, to access valuable data sets. So basically you can read the literature, you can get your own algorithm, and you can train it by yourself. And I think that's great, this culture of openness for research purpose and for transparency. But it also comes with some very touchy points, especially because big tech companies developing these systems, they tend to comply with regulation, and they care a lot about their reputation. So we kind of have some triggers to keep them under control. We can discuss this point, but that's pretty much how I say it. Whereas in front of that, individuals, like very small actors, they tend to have very little to lose in terms of both reputation and compliance when doing so. And this is why we see a couple of startups or like very small platforms or websites developing things like deep nudes, which basically tend to address women, which is very problematic, or the Spinner, which is another website that proposes services to nudge people in order to put some ideas in their mind and try to constrain their behavior. These are not developed by big companies. They are developed by very small structures, individuals, and this is clearly unethical and pretty hard to control. So yeah, that's just the point I wanted to make on the availability of data and the fact that we can't control the actors in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to add to that idea, which I really like, I think dynamic, right? There's this whether we call it learning or evolving or whatever, dynamic decision making, just like humans. That's one of the things about the technology that's so incredible. What's challenging, and it's not a negative to the technology, it's just in development, right? Depending on which group is doing whatever. But brute force learning, looking at a million pictures of cats, right? I think sometimes there's this also mysticism. It can go either way, either like a million pictures of cats and you still showed a dog. That may make it seem like the technology is not credible, but that's a methodology that the technology is using. But when I say dynamic, I think, again, I'm going to go back to data sovereignty, and there's this vision that we have, which is about creating for every single human. It's very aspirational, an algorithmic level terms and conditions for yourself. And the logic here is that when you're walking around in physical space or in an immersive environment, right now the signals that we have, we're all talking on a Skype type platform. So we're used to this, but we're not seeing, the thousands of algorithms that are tracking us in real time. And it's not that those things are negative or evil. We simply don't see them. They're invisible. So we won't be able to make any decisions about them. This is why design is so critical. And I'll use the term data sovereignty in these terms and conditions. It's not a silver bullet. It's not easy. But for me, it's the equivalent of saying, like, is human rights hard? The answer is sure. Does that mean we avoid focusing on it? The answer is, of course not. We have to have human rights. Well, think about this, right? Like, as I walk around in the world right now, the physical world, and there's things like facial recognition or whatever, if I don't have assigned to my phone, which has a chip, or somehow attached to my driver's license or passport, a sort of way that algorithmically signals back my general choices about my data, which will still have to be interpreted, but then I am in a reality, an invisible actor or an invisible node in the system. I'm not invisible, but I'm only able to be tracked. I'm not actually speaking back. Even where people think, well, I'm tweeting and Facebook posting, these are elements of our identity. But we have to be able to say on a regular, ongoing basis, here are my general preferences about data. And by the way, this again is a good thing for businesses and governments, because it's not saying I'm hiding my data or I'm selling my, you have to buy it from me. It's saying where there's things like open data or whatever else. And there's a lot of terms of open data and data commons. It doesn't just mean like, here you go, everybody, here's even more data about me. You want to share it with clarity, right? Things like medical data, right? You don't want people to access your medical data because it's also just not useful from a design standpoint out of context. My heart data is of interest, but you have to know my age and all that. But when I'm running on my daily run today, it's a very different set of data. But when I want to reveal that and how and to who, that's also the critical part. Data sovereignty, blockchain, a key part of this logic is trust, which is I share my data once I trust the organization saying, here's how. And it's not just saying we're going to use the data for, quote, good stuff. That's fine, but that's somewhat irrelevant, right? Because a bank doesn't say, hey, I want to protect your money as long as it's good. What are your intentions? Are they good? Then I'll take your money. They say, here's how we take your money and it's safe. The morality, the ethicality, these are questions that are critical, but they're not design questions. And also for parity to happen, for any human actor to truly have a voice about their data, data sovereignty has to exist. And if it doesn't, we just have to say that society is saying, I guess, only outside in tracking is all that is useful. And then that's when the larger ethical question of why aren't we giving a voice to everybody? That's when you really know that there's some kind of obfuscation or agenda which has to be questioned.
Thanks a lot, John. I think we need to wrap up now. So I wanted to thank you all for participating in this panel. That we touched upon a lot of really important discussion points about the need for ethical AI and the need to control certain aspects of AI. So thanks a lot again, and thanks to everybody who attended this session.
Leila, thank you so much. Really appreciate you moderating that session. Riveting conversation there, and of course, John there was in full flow. If you want to continue hearing from John and also from Hubert, they'll be taking questions from the Networking Lounge Speaker Q&A room. The link is going to be dropped now into the session, but in the meantime, thanks to Ike, Leila, and Dima. Now we're going to go straight into our next session, and I'm going to be staying right here with you all, so please do stay with me right now. I'm really thrilled. We are so thrilled to welcome our next headline speaker. She's the co-founder of TomTom, has been voted one of the top 50 most inspirational women in European tech. She champions women in the workforce and advocates passionately for improved social mobility through education. In 2018, she launched Codam, a tuition-free non-profit coding college in Amsterdam, because she believes that coding is the engine for innovation that is driving the world forward faster than ever before. Here to discuss what work will look like in 2030, finding new ways of working in a new world, please welcome Corinne Vigreux, who's the co-founder of TomTom. Corinne, welcome. Now, while we just get you on stage, please do let us know in chat if you have any questions for Corinne, who'll be joining us shortly. We find ourselves at a very interesting point in time. And I think it would be really interesting to hear about the projection of what the world of work is really going to look like in the next 10 years or so. So, Corinne, if you can hear me, you should be able to request to share your audio and visual in the top right-hand corner of your screen. And in doing so, we'll be able to just bring you through here to the live stream. And whilst that just gets sorted out with our fantastic team behind the scenes, it's been really great to hear these sort of multifaceted conversations that we've had so far today from leveraging AI in your organizations. So don't forget that you can actually network with your fellow audience members using the WhatsApp functionality, where you can join the online WhatsApp group. There are some fantastic ways to engage. Don't forget that the overarching theme for the World AI Summit and this Inspired Mind series is without borders. And we are requesting that our audience can send through some videos where they talk about their thoughts. And perhaps in some of the breaks, you've seen some of our speakers share their thoughts about what they feel about without borders as an issue. If you are compelled to share your thoughts with us, please do tweet us at World Summit AI, and you can also join the conversation online with our official hashtags. Hashtag AI Brains is one of my favorites. Hashtag WSci20 or Insci20. And if you scroll up in the chat function, you should be able to see that. And if not, our fantastic team will be able to place that in there for you. Now, just thinking ahead to sort of what we're going to be discussing in this next session with Corinne. Hello, delighted to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
Welcome. We're just getting a little bit of feedback. Let's just do a quick hello again.
Hello.
Welcome. Okay, now you might have a second tab open. If so, if you could just close that and keep the one that you're active in with our beautiful backstage team.
Is that working now?
Perfect.
There
We've got you loud and clear. Welcome. Where are you tuned in from?
From my living room.
Where in the world is your beautiful living room? I'm loving that.
It's a very old canal house in Amsterdam.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I've introduced you to our fantastic audience. And what an interesting time in the world that we find ourselves in this global pandemic. Let's just start there. How are you doing in this pandemic scenario? And how is that impacting you right now in your workforce?
Yeah, well, you can imagine that since March, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. We have 5,000 people all over the world, and all the offices, about 50 of them, were shutting one after the other. So on one where we were used to working this way at TomTom, because we have a lot of engineers working remotely and across location, but at the same time, yes, it's been a big shock for everyone. And in a way, March was a bit of novelty, and we managed to get everybody ready. And but I must say now, I can feel through our people that this second wave, and yeah, the weather's not shining, the days are getting shorter, people are getting tired, and I find that it's impacting the mental health of people mainly. Of our colleagues, and especially the young ones. We've onboarded people online. Some people have never met members of their teams, and you can see that it's taking a toll on people. And therefore, we're working super hard with management and leaders to stay inclusive and to look after each other as much as we possibly can. So those are very testing times.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm here in London right now, and without the lighting in front of me, I'm shrouded in darkness. It's a very rainy, wet day. And obviously, this is the thing. So going into sort of like this second wave, as you mentioned, I guess the inevitable rise in home working is a situation that we're in right now. What do you think that the impact can now have on shaping the future of workplace and workers? You've outlined sort of where we're at right now, but what is the impact, and where can we take this forward to really understand where we might be in the future?
I think, to be honest, we won't get back. I don't want to sound cliche, but we won't get back to the old world. I think this pandemic has changed the way we work pretty much forever. It doesn't mean that people will be working from home forever, but I think we're looking at a hybrid system. We're looking at a way where you can work from anywhere. And for a company like ours, it also has a big impact on attracting talent from anywhere. And so we'll see people will go to the office when they need to, when there is a particular meeting, and our office will be transformed into experience areas where you have probably more collective areas where people and teams will gather, or you might be decided to have a cup of coffee with someone. But I'd expect people will come to work at different times, and not every day. And I think that's probably a good thing. And I think companies where there is a high level of trust between management and your employees, where actually, you know, it doesn't matter where you're working from. You're trusting your employees to do what they have to do, the teams to work together. It has a lot of benefits because you can have a better work-life balance. As you know, in London, I lived in London for a long time. The commute can be horrendous. I used to live in North London and commute to Central London, and you know, you can spend 3 hours of your life in very crowded public transport. It would have a big impact on traffic. It's something as TomTom I'm very aware of, and we see traffic really being decreasing. I think that's a good thing for the environment. So I think on the whole, we need to take the best out of this crisis and readjust our way of working for the better for the individual and the companies.
I really love that earlier you mentioned new members of your workforce joining and being onboarded. And I think we have a responsibility to graduates and new talent being hired into any workforce in any industry. In very different circumstances, they are now joining organizations. And you also mentioned trust. And I'm a true believer of giving everyone all of the trust in the world until it's broken or there's evidence of it not being there. How do we look after the next generation and bring them through this new normal, if that's what we decide to now call this?
Yeah, I think so. I think at some point we'll have to go to the office a little bit. I mean, I see my son, for example, just starting a new job in London, actually from his bedroom here, hasn't met anybody of his colleagues. So I think you will need at some point there'll be moments where people will get together, but there will be different moments. As you know, work can be, you need to focus on something, and then you might be working from home for that time, and then you need to interact with your team, and then you can plan that and go to the office. I think we'll get that sort of hybrid system. And I think for young people, they need that interaction. They need to build a network within an organization, know where the support are. So that's why I really believe in this kind of mixed way of working. And I think that will be that will be the new norm.
Yeah, I like the idea of so I work by myself. I'm also set up at home, and I'm sort of used to working like this anyway. So I think my mental resilience was quite strong in a way that I've been able to help my friends and family through. I mean, is technology potentially going to like remove some jobs in our ecosystems? Is it going to increase some sort of inequality? Or is it really going to open this new era of like a utopia where we can have healthier societies? Like, is this a good thing, or is this going to be more challenging?
Well, I'm a big proponent. I think technology is making things better. It's a good thing. If you look at the way, a lot of people often say, well, it was better in the past. I just don't believe that. If I look at all the progress we've made, if you look at the macro level how we live, technology has a massive impact on our lives and will carry on doing so. Technology will mean that probably some repetitive jobs are being taken over by robots. At the same time, there will be different type of work for people. So I think there will be, things will change. They've always changed. I mean, there will be a lot of new opportunities for the workforce and much more fulfilling as well, and more free time. And so I think we're going to a better society, and technology will help. Now we need to be careful. Technology can also be bad, and there need to be plans and regulation, and we need to look at data protection. But on the whole, I think technology will make big improvements. My worry is education. My worry is that I don't see the education system providing or teaching the digital skills that are required to fully participate in this new world. Because at the same time, you can learn so much online that there's so much access that we could get to a fairer world as well, where actually more people can have access to information. In the olden days, depending where you were born and what you did, you had access to certain things, and social inequality was growing. My belief is that with access to information as we have today, with the plethora of courses online and access to this knowledge, actually we might have a chance to a fairer world and more equal opportunities.
I really love that. I think it's technology, as you are described, as an enabler, and it's a tool for greatness that we can all achieve together. A big part of some of the skills that we probably need in the future, like soft skills, like empathy, and creativity is going to have a whole new resurgence in its own way. Is creativity a big part of your work at TomTom, and how do you stimulate that with your teams?
Well, creativity is, when you innovate, a company that innovates like TomTom, that's what we've been doing for years, always pushing the boundaries and trying to think different ways. That's all about creativity and imagination. And I think software engineering is about creativity. It's about looking at different ways of solving problems. And I think people underestimate that. It's not, innovation is about creativity. Solving problem is about creativity. Software engineering is about creativity. And that's why we need diversity. And that's why we need more women, and we need different culture, because if we look at problems with a different lens and different experiences, we're more likely to be more creative, to arrive at more interesting solutions. So I'm a big proponent of, I believe creativity is very important. I think diversity plays a key role into that and in technology. And so I'm relatively confident for the future from that point of view.
I love that, because as I was reading your story and sort of how you jumped on this new data and GPS data to really build TomTom from the beginning, like how, when you tackle innovation and coming up with the answers for the future, how do you do that? Because everyone has a different way of doing it. I'd love to hear your unique perspective of how you do what you do.
I think it always starts with seeing a problem. That's what entrepreneurs do. You see a problem and you think this can be done better. Driving in London with my A to Z, you remember, and when the address is always on the spiral in the middle in the corner where you can, and the one-way system that's always changing. And you kind of think to yourself, this there must be a way of doing this better. And I think that when you take the idea to the next stage, of course, there's a big part on execution. But I think what innovators and entrepreneurs do is really try to anticipate. They try to solve things that they think are real issue for society at large or for people. And I think that's the way you drive things forward. So I'm very much, every time I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs and young companies, I always try to bring them back. So what is the problem you're solving? And I think if you are aware of the technologies that are available to you, and today there's amazing amount of open source software, there is a lot of things you can do, which is much more difficult in our time. There is so many, with all that creativity and that power unleashed, there is a lot of things that can be done, a lot of solutions can be found. So I think the idea is really to identify a problem. And the bigger the problem, and the more complex the problem, you need big teams, but you should not give up. And I think that's what we did when we came up with the first sat-nav. And today we're on the next stage of problem, and how do we get sort of self-driving cars on the road, and how do we reduce congestion, and how do we make the roads safer? So you're always trying to get that little bit further.
Yeah, no, I really love that. And I was thinking about sort of within organizations, you have these roles of chiefs of staff, you have HR managers and HR directors, kind of wondering if that's going to iterate into sort of internal community management and really engaging the workforce in this new kind of place that we find ourselves. Are you finding that you're having to, with your leadership hat on, are you having to lead in different ways, maybe with more empathy or maybe with more trust? What are you finding, and how do you think that's going to trend into the future of this changing world?
That's very, very interesting questions. Very good question as well, because that's very fundamental. I do think that I'm private enough. I'm 57 this year, so I've been through all sorts of leadership methods. Also coming from different cultural background, I've seen leadership in different countries in different way. Leadership of tomorrow is based. A lot of it is based on empathy. It's really trying to find the right skill set in people, what motivates them, what they tick. How can we get the best energy, the best interest out of people to put them in the right jobs, really? And I think we need to look after each other. We need to share the vision. I think as companies, we need to have a very clear vision of what it is that we're trying to do. Then we need to take our team with us. We need to work with people who share that vision. I think it's very important for any jobs that, at whatever level, that you work for a company where actually you believe in what they do. You believe in their values. You believe in respect of your colleagues that you work with. So I think the human aspect and the HR function is where your question started, is also changing beyond recognition. I think HR is playing an increasingly bigger role into the world of tomorrow, in the world and in creating good leadership than it did a few years ago. A few years ago, it was payroll and comp and ben, and now it's really organization. It's how do we make sure that we work well as a team. There's a big shortage of talent all over the world, and I think we're all fighting. The bigger problems you're trying to solve, the most talented people you need around the table, and you need also people that you work well with, so that team spirit and that working together towards a common goal is extremely virtuous, if you want. So I do believe that indeed we need to we need more empathy in leadership, and that's why I think I hate stereotypes, but I do think a balance in gender and a balance in culture will help with that, to break the old format. And so yes, I think that function is changing.
I really love that, and I would urge anyone who's watching and part of this community to use the networking functions, and also to truly think about what your values are. If you're looking for employment right now, like maybe you're going through a bit of a career break, your life has been disrupted, really take on board some of the advice that Corinne has given us, to really think about what your values align to, so that you're actually living a purposeful life, so that when it comes to scenarios like COVID and this global pandemic, which may not go away for some time now, we all have to sort of adapt. And if you're not happy in what you're doing every day, under already extremely challenging times, it's just going to weigh on you even more. So I think the future is bright. The lights are on when it's slightly dark. Corinne, do you have any final comments for our audience? And how can they follow you? Are you on Twitter?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. Yeah. But I so agree with you, Anushka. I think that we're gonna have to, and the young people have to work for a long time. And I think we live in a world that's constantly changing. So what I would say to anyone, and it's be curious, keep learning, keep looking after people around you, work with people you respect and you trust. And I think that's the beginning of a good working life. I think it's very important, those assets. And I think I agree with you. The future is bright. I think we are, even if you look at, there are a lot of things around, but on the whole, things are getting better. I think technology will help. And yeah, be curious, keep learning, and work with people you love and like and respect.
Gosh, Corinne, thank you so much for that hugely topical insights there. Thank you so much for everything. Everyone else, you guys that are watching, we're going to be back after a quick break. Please do, as we said, try some of that one-to-one networking via the networking tab. Corinne is on Twitter. You can follow her there. And we'll be back after this short break.